Welcome. We're gathering to continue, or actually finish up, our study on the book of the Acts of the Apostles. And today we're looking at the last 5 chapters. We're talking about chapter 24 through 28. Now, a lot has happened as we've been reading throughout the book of Acts. And as I'll touch on momentarily in my message, about the last third of the book of Acts deals with Paul, focuses primarily on Paul and his many and various journeys, and he goes to lots of different places throughout that time. But picking up in chapter 4, just really briefly, basically Paul ends up in Jerusalem, even though he's been told by at least a couple of different folks not to return to Jerusalem, or rather more, that if he returns to Jerusalem, he's going to be arrested. So what does Paul do? He goes to Jerusalem. He goes to Jerusalem. He goes and he preaches in the temple, and there he is recognized by some Jewish believers who are not from Jerusalem, but who had seen him in places throughout Asia, and they raise the alarm. Hey, this guy was preaching all kinds of stuff that doesn't jive with our basic beliefs. So, he's preaching falsehoods. We've got to stop him. And so the people there who were gathered there at the temple at that time, they rose up, they mob him, they start beating him up, and of course this commotion causes is so loud that the Roman tribune hears him, or hears this going on, and he and his cohorts come to the temple. They see Paul being accosted, and of course, since the crowds are beating up this person, the tribune's natural assumption is, well, if he's being beaten up, he's the one who's obviously started all of this. So they arrest Paul. They bring him back to the barracks. They're about to flog him when Paul says, is it your custom to flog a Roman citizen? And the tribune says, oh, well, I had to pay a lot of money to become a Roman citizen. And Paul says, I was natural born. I am a natural born Roman citizen. And the tribune messes up his toga, because to flog a natural born Roman citizen, if you do that, the sentence for that is, guess what? Death. And that's the solution to a lot of problems that Rome encounters, that if you go against them, their solution is death. For a non-Roman citizen, that death is usually beheading or poison. For a natural-born citizen, or for a Roman citizen in general. For a non-Roman citizen, it tends to be much messier. You get tossed into the arena to be eaten by the Colosseum, to be eaten by wild animals, or act as gladiator bait. Or then, of course, there's the ever-popular, hey, crucifixion! So the tribune stops this. He gets Paul before the local governor, a guy named Felix, and Felix hears Paul's appeal. So and actually Paul, well, there's a few other things going on. I'm already getting bogged down, and we're not even to chapter 24 yet. But so Paul goes before the governor Felix, and he lays out his case, during which the governor listens to him, and when along with a lot of the religious leaders of the day. So Felix kind of likes Paul, and so he keeps him in dialogue. He doesn't release him, though. Paul continues to be in prison in Caesarea, and Paul and Felix continue to have these meetings and talk. Interesting, chapter 25, verse 26. Well, let me start back at verse 24. Some days later, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was also Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him speak concerning the faith in Christ Jesus. As he discussed justice, self-control, and the coming judgment, Felix became frightened and said, go away from the present. When I have an opportunity, I will send for you. So at that time, Felix, hoped that money would be given him by Paul, and for that reason, he used to send for him very often and converse with him. Felix wanted a bribe, basically. If Paul could have given him a bribe, Felix would have let him go. After, verse 27, after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. Yeah, nice guy, Felix. Way to go there, bud. So Paul spends 2 years in prison, then comes before the new governor, Festus. Now, when he's brought before Festus, and he once again lays out why he understands he's in prison, from Paul's understanding, actually, we're going to jump back to chapter 24, where Paul is laying out his case before Felix. Paul says, while I was in the temple contemplating the rite of purification without any crowd disturbance, but there were some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you to make an accusation if they have anything against me. He's saying this to Felix, the governor. Or let these men here tell what crime they have found when I stood before the council, unless it was this one sentence that I called out while I was standing before them. So Paul's saying before Felix, here's the deal. That these non-local guys made a big fuss, but they're not here. They should be here saying why I'm arrested. But if they're not here, then let these religious leaders tell you why I'm arrested. But since they won't, I will. This is why I am here standing before you today, because I said this one thing. Verse 21. It is about the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today. So that's the argument that Paul has made before Felix. Felix, 2 years later, Festus comes along. Paul is now before Festus, and Paul is once again making the same argument. Chapter 25, verse 10, Paul says, I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Now, if I am wrong and have committed something for which I deserve to die, I am not trying to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to the emperor. So, what does that mean? Paul's a natural-born Roman citizen. That means he can appeal to present his case before the emperor, before Caesar, right? Now, excuse me, good things and bad things about that. You make your case, or you plead to go before the emperor, you have to go before the emperor. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to go before the emperor. However, only a natural-born Roman citizen can do this. So that's where Paul is at. He's getting tired because, like I said, he's been in prison for 2 years. He's made his case 3 times now. He made it to the tribune. He made it to Felix. Now he's making it to Festus. And nobody can bring up against him charges that are worthy or that will hold up in a Roman court. And so that's why he says, if I am in the wrong, why he says, I'm appealing to the emperor's tribunal. That's where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Because he knows he hasn't done anything against Roman law. And yet they keep dragging him before Roman officials. So Festus says, oh, well, you know what? You've appealed to the emperor, so we're going to ship you off to the emperor. All right. So, but before he goes to the emperor, yet another stop, he's got to go. So there's local governors, and then there's the king of the whole area, King Agrippa. So Festus writes a letter. Governor Festus writes a letter to King Agrippa and says, hey, I got this guy here. It seems to be a local problem, but he's made this appeal. So because you are so honorable and intelligent, I'm going to bring him before you so that he can present his case to you, so that you can tell me what charges I should write up in order to send this with him on to Rome. In other words, Festus is passing the buck, basically. He said, but he's also trying to, kiss the king's. He's trying to make nice with the king. I'm sorry, I'll be polite. I'll think that's a nice way of saying it. So he's trying to butter up the king, say, oh, Agrippa, you're so much more intelligent than I am. You're so much smarter. Maybe you can figure out what the charges are. So Festus brings Paul before Agrippa, and Agrippa and his wife, what is her name? Well, Agrippa and his wife listen to Paul. So when he's before Agrippa, Paul, once again, lays out his argument that I'm only he said he says I can verse 2, this is chapter 26, verse 2. I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, that I'm here, let me try that again. I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, I am to make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews, because you are especially familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg of you to listen to me patiently. So Paul, too, begins in a very placating tone. Yep, okay, Agrippa, I know that you know Jewish life. So it's a good thing that because you'll be able to understand why I'm standing before you. And then he goes on to say that I'm here because this is what I was. I was raised to be a faithful Jew. I am born a Jew of Jewish parents. I was raised to be a faithful Jew. I was also raised in the ways of the Pharisees. There are two main branches of Jewish faith at this time. There are a few others, but there's two primary branches of Jewish faith at this time. There's the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And one of the primary differences between these two groups is that the Pharisees believe in the resurrection of the dead. And so, remember, like I said, when Paul was before the tribune, that's when he called out, when he realized actually he was before the Sanhedrin, and that he called out that, when he realized that there's both Pharisees and Sadducees there, he calls out, brothers, I'm a Pharisee, and I'm here because I have been preaching about the resurrection of the dead, which is what we say happened with Jesus, right? Jesus rose from the dead. But Paul here in chapter 26 is saying, Agrippa, I know that you know that, so I'm just reminding you that the Pharisees believe in the resurrection of the dead. I am talking about the resurrection of somebody who did indeed die. Then he goes into his whole story of his conversion. Now, this is the third time in the book of Acts that he has told his story of the conversion. Remember, all the way back in chapter 9, we talked about this several weeks ago. In chapter 9, Paul was on his way to Damascus. Actually, that's back when he was still called Saul. He went by his Hebrew name, Saul, instead of his Greek name, Paul. And Saul, on his way on the road to Damascus, encounters this blinding light, and he hears this voice, and as we hear it, as Paul says in chapter 26, with this in mind, starting at verse 12, with this in mind, I was traveling to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priest. Now, remember, this is the third time he's telling this story. When at midday along the road, Your Excellency, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining all around me and my companions. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It hurts you to kick against the goads. I asked, who are you, Lord? The Lord answered, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you to serve and testify to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you. So, he's retelling the story. He's telling it to Agrippa, who has probably not heard this story before. But like I said, this is the third time he's telling this story. So we have so by the time he gets done at the end of chapter 26, um, Agrippa says, well, this man has done nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. However, then Agrippa turns and says to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to the emperor. So Paul has kind of put himself now in this pot. He's gotten himself in trouble once again. If you remember my sermon topic from a couple of weeks ago, when the blank hits the fan, Paul's done it to himself this time. So the last couple of chapters, 27 and 28, revolve around Paul's journey now from the Palestine areas, from Caesarea over to Rome. They put him on a boat. The boat, of course, because nothing is simple for Paul. They put him on a boat. The boat encounters a storm at sea. They end up being shipwrecked. They have this interesting little occurrence then once they finally make it to shore. Now, surprisingly, read the chapters, because there's this whole cool kind of interaction between Paul and the guards and what they're afraid he's about to do, and how Paul tries to save everybody on board on the ship. They reach the island. Paul is actually bitten by a viper, but he is not affected, and so the people who are with him realize, wow, this guy must really be something special if a poisonous snake can chomp its fangs into him and he's not affected by it. So he witnesses his faith and his belief in God simply by being bitten by a snake. Yeah, that's an everyday occurrence for most of us, right? Sure. But then he finally, in chapter 28, he arrives in Rome, and what does he do? But of course, even though he's in prison, he again begins to preach the gospel, and he continues to preach the gospel, so that, as it says, verse 30 in chapter 28, Paul lived there a whole 2 years. This is in prison. Paul lived there 2 years while on his own expense, and welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. So Paul ends up in Rome. Now, we know the rest of the story. We know that Paul's story doesn't end there. We know that eventually Paul will be crucified, or not crucified, will be beheaded in Rome by the emperor, who generally never hears his case, or at least as far as we're aware of, the Caesar never hears Paul's case. He just kills him because he's a Christian, and these Christians are causing too many problems. But it's the theme of our last message, the theme that you heard on Sunday. Tell your life story like your life depended upon it, because that's what's happening to Paul. He's got to convince these people that legally he has done nothing wrong, but even more so, he's more concerned about telling the gospel than he is concerned about his own life. So that's where my study questions have come from. What do you believe in? What do you believe in strongly enough that you'd be willing to die for? Because in all reality, you and I, here in the United States, here in North America, we're probably not going to have to give up our life because we're a Christian. But what would you give up your life for? So, got some other questions for you there as well. That's the main one. Preach like your life depended upon it. Be a witness of your faith as though your life depended upon it. Because you know what, actually, it does. So, hey, I hope you all have some good discussions. This went a little bit longer than I anticipated, but we all know that I can't give short answers. So, stay safe, have good discussions, wear your masks out in public. God's peace be with you. Bye.